Hey guys, welcome back to Hollywood Mechanic. Today we're going to be talking about the Ferrari FF and of course the GTC Lusso and what your expected cost of ownership is if you buy one of these 10-year-old Ferraris. All right, so I just saw a video by Donut Media, which I used to love, and it was talking about what the ownership experience of the most heavily depreciated Ferrari was. And they kind of used a little bit of clickbait there. They showed a car that sold on Copart that had some serious damage and said that was representative of the cost of the vehicle. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I have seen cars sell for the $90,000 mark with things like a cracked windshield, a lot of rust, and already failing components. So it's not that far off. Where they really seem to have misled you is with the cost of ownership. In that video, that very car I had actually worked on here and rebuilt the PTU. And they, in that video, despite being told that by the owner, did not mention that. They said it's a $35,000, $40,000 cost to repair the PTU, which my rebuild cost is about $10,000 and fixes the flaw with that PTU. And then in the same video, they mentioned just in passing, yeah, this one's already had the transmission replaced as well, which wasn't actually true. Ferrari of Los Angeles had replaced a mid case and it just says gearbox, but it's actually just the weep hole section of the mid case, which I'm sure if you follow my channel and you know about the weep hole leak that plagues both the Mercedes and the Ferraris. But it wasn't a complete rebuild, and that was an $18,000 cost, and it immediately failed. 3,000 miles later, the car was back here at the shop again, and they just kind of glossed over that. So, you know, it was fun watching them try to fit stuff in the trunk, but as far as like a real ownership experience, they dropped the value on you there. They did not tell you what's going on, and that's something we're going to fix today. So Micah, why are we supposed to trust you about this Ferrari FF and GTC cost of ownership? Well, like I said before, with the PTU, I designed a kit that fixes a flaw Ferrari knows about. They just replaced the entire unit with another flawed unit if you bring it in for repair to them. With the GTC Lusso, they provided the same unit. I'm very curious to see what the Perswange comes with because it has the same PTU in it, and I have a feeling it's going to be the same flawed design. One silver lining of it coming with the same unit is that SUV is more likely to be driven for high miles, which means it may actually trigger a recall, which hopefully would give an attorney grounds for a class action for the GTC Lusso and the FF. So make sure you keep those repair bills. If you pay them yourself, you may end up getting a refund on that. So, but because of that kit that I developed, I have seen a lot of FFs. I've installed kits on 30 different FFs and sold kits around the world in the number around 70 kits to repair that PTU. And because of that, I've just seen them come in at various stages of life, at various mileages, at various years, and they are very consistent with their maintenance needs, and most of it has to do with time and not mileage. You should check out my video, which is harder, time versus mileage. It means that time is much harder on a vehicle than mileage. You can get a low mileage vehicle and a high mileage vehicle at the 10-year mark, 12-year mark. They'll share a lot of the same maintenance needs. So with this car, we're gonna start at the very front, and I'm gonna tell you everything that will fail on you before it hits 12 years old. And again, we talked about in the beginning, the FF being the same as the GTC4. Other than cosmetics, other than that the GTC4 has a terrible four-wheel steering system that can also give you problems. Other than that, same engine, same PTU, same transmission, very minor adjustments. I don't want to hear, oh, they upgraded the transmission, it doesn't fail as often. No, it's just not as old, and they do fail just as often when they're subjected to the same conditions. So let's go ahead and go to the front of the car and I'll show you what we have with the FF. Okay, so this should make you a little bit frightened. This is not an uncommon sight for a 10, 12-year-old Ferrari FF. I have a lot of these cars where I had one car from Vegas, went to Ferrari of Las Vegas. They said it's not going to be $110,000 to fix the issues that the car currently has. I think our cost was $65,000 out the door, and a majority of that is parts cost. But as you can see, they're very big engines crammed into a small space in the front, and so there is a lot of labor. This is that notorious PTU system that everyone knows fails. I'll go ahead and put a light on that here. And I'm not going to talk about that as much today because of the flaw. Now, there are other things other than the flaw that can fail. This one was rebuilt a while ago, came back with a PTU problem. It was the clutch pressure sensors which are failing, which is, you know, is that reminiscent of the DCT where the clutch pressure systems or sensors fail at 10 years? It's because that DCT fluid that's used in this reservoir here is very caustic, I'm sure you're tired of hearing me say, and those pressure sensors are subjected to high pressure of that fluid, and then they have started to fail. Currently, Ferrari has none in stock. We have 2 original ones from Ferrari. There's a bunch of Chinese ones. We've used some per the client's request. They are working at the moment, but just remember, if you're going with a Chinese sensor, if that sensor starts giving incorrect data to the car, then this is connected directly to the engine. So if the clutch fails to release, you could have an engine stalling or a jerky takeoff and cause damage either to the engine or to the transmission itself. Stepping away from the PTU, we're not going to really talk about that much more. In the front of the car, we have the front bumper, which is missing here. I'll let our editor here show you what that looks like. Very common problem when they sit outside a lot to develop some waviness to the front of them. It's a really poor design. There's a styrofoam cushion in behind it, but it doesn't matter. It still develops this like hideous waviness to it. The real correct repair for that would be to go away from a urethane bumper and go to like a carbon fiber. Someone needs to mold that, or maybe mold, let's say, the GTC Lusso bumper and make it backward compatible for this and make it out of carbon fiber, and then you would no longer have that waviness happening. Just behind that, we have our radiator and our oil cooler. We're in the process of developing an aluminum one. This one is one we did not develop. This is a Chinese one, which is it's just not usable. It's got a lot of slag inside the radiator. It doesn't quite fit properly. We're having an all aluminum one built that's actually made from CNC tanks on the end, so you get a perfect replica of the factory. But this is what the radiator core looks like. And right here we have our oil cooler, which is aluminum tank welded to an aluminum core. That's all that should ever be in a supercar. But right next to it we have our radiator, which is a plastic core and a plastic tank and an aluminum core that's bonded together. So of course they begin to leak. This one right here is from one of our test cars. You'll see a dripping or like a little crustiness start to develop on the ends, and this lasts about 10-12 years. It doesn't matter the mileage. The more you drive 100,000 miles, it's still going to work great. But when it gets to about 12 years, they leak significantly, and it's a lot of labor to replace. Currently, Ferrari is out of stock of these, and if you pay the ridiculous price Ferrari is giving you, then in 10 years you've got to do it again. Moving further back, obviously normal maintenance items are hoses, the thermostat, but just behind the PTU here, we have the AC compressor. You have to remove the PTU to get to that compressor just here. So it's a lot of work. What we do when we do the PTU rebuild, we take the AC compressor out. It's a Delphi unit on most of them and rebuild them. It's very common for the clutch seal on the front of the AC compressor to fail, and you can shine a black light on the front of it and you'll see green oil being slung out from that. That will cause your gas, refrigerant gas, to go low, as well as oil that's in the compressor to go low. Just rebuild it. We charge, I think it's like $650 rebuild cost, plus the time, about 2.5 hours to remove it and reinstall it when we do our PTU. Just ahead of the PTU, we have the steering rack here. This, tie rod ends are very common when they get older. You get that loose feel where it's still a sharp feel, but it just, when you turn, it goes a little further than you expected or may have a little bit of a wobble. There's inner tie rod ends that Ferrari doesn't sell. They require you to buy the entire steering rack, which is made by TRW. We do have inner tie rod ends made by TRW specifically for this car. So if you need inner tie rod ends, we do sell those separately. Ferrari also, they do sell the outer tie rod end. So when you get a loose steering feel, that's the majority of the time what it is. The steering rack, as long as you change the fluid and the reservoir at the recommended times and use the correct fluid, they have a long life. Now, if you see the top of the power steering reservoir and it's green sticker, that means it's a green fluid like CHF11S, which is a Pentasyn fluid. If you're on the 7-year maintenance plan from Ferrari where you get covered maintenance, don't be surprised if you see red fluid in there. It seems like they just throw whatever when you're on that plan. I've seen several come from Ferrari with that maintenance plan with red fluid in there. That is not supposed to be in there. You need to switch that back, flush out that system, and put Pindicin CHF11S or 202, which is compatible as well, and about half the price. Behind that, we have the front timing cover. It's not as often to leak, although sometimes this pulley here does have a seal behind it that will leak. There's also a timing chain tensioner gasket here and here. There are two of those that are often leaking. You should just go ahead and do those when you do the valve cover gaskets that are very common to leak. We'll talk about that in a minute here. Just behind that, we have our engine. So that's where we're seeing, our valve cover gasket. You may smell an oil smell. If you lift up the car and look at the back of the engine, you can see the oil dripping down, and you'll also see oil dripping down on the face here from those valve covers. That's mostly because you have a very high heat exhaust system along the edge of the valve cover, and it just kind of cooks that valve cover gasket. The timing solenoids are underneath the valve cover, and those we recommend doing at the same time, because if they fail, you can see the windshield wiper tray, the intake has to come off, the valve covers have to come off, and just to get to those timing solenoids. And we'll talk a little bit about why they fail, but it's very common when they get old to let oil pass through the solenoid into the plug and travel up the harness. So we just recommend replacing those. Anyone who owns a BMW knows how common timing solenoid failures are, so we just do that while we're in there. Also, while you have the intake off, the direct injection injectors are right there, readily accessible. Take those off and send them to a high pressure, like 20 bar fuel injection cleaning company. We are currently in talks with VF Engineering down in Orange County to let them do our injectors. They need to be done at a very high pressure because that's the way that they operate. You will see that this is what VF is telling me, that the ethanols in gasoline, even if you're using a very low ethanol gasoline, is causing buildup and corrosion of the fuel system that then causes an improper spray. And I'll have Troy throw up here the numbers of the flow rate on these injectors on this very car, which this car has 27,000 miles and already very poor. Some of them were flowing half of what they should have been and dripping, and that causes a clumsy startup, a fuel smell, overheated cats, a lot of other problems. So just go ahead and do it while you're in here. I have used RC injectors in Torrance before. Again, I would recommend if you go with someone, make sure they're extremely fluent with these injectors, because if they mess it up, it's a lot of work to get back at them and replace them. And just one note about it being direct injection, we're talking about the direct injectors. There is a lot of carbon and oil blow by in the intake system that then hits the back of the intake valve and causes buildup and slows flow, eventually cause valve stem seal leaks. So one thing you should do with direct injection, any direct injection, is every oil change, use some of the CRC intake valve turbo cleaner, spray it into the engine, let it sit, then drive it, and that will clean off those valves, and then do the oil change afterwards. It will help. You won't have to do a walnut blast of the intake valves. It'll clean out the intake. You can see the intake hoses that drip oil into the intake. It usually drips right on the number 12 and number 1 spark plug coil as well. We put a larger O-ring on those to kind of help seal them up. Make sure your oil level is always correct. Check it when it's running, and then if it's correct and not overfilled, you won't get as much oil blow by, and you do that direct injection cleaning, and you'll have a much better life of the engine. While that's out, another thing you should look at is right here, straight down, are 2 heater control valves. Those heater control valves are made in China, and they are not sealed from the outside air, so a lot of dirt and dust comes in them, and then they have little plastic gears that will catch that dirt, trap it, and then the tiny little electro servo motor can't turn it, and so then you'll start to feel heat or a lack of heat when you want it inside the cabin. There are 2, one for passenger side and one for driver's side. So if you turn the AC on and you feel heat from one side, that's most likely the culprit. Sometimes you can take them apart and clean them. Most of the time, that little motor burns up and you need to replace them. But if before that happens, you take them apart, clean them, and re-grease with some white lithium grease in the appropriate amount, last a long time. Just behind those is the battery. The battery is right here. It's in a foil blanket and it's right above the passenger side exhaust manifold, and it gets extremely, extremely hot. Because of that, I see these batteries being replaced every 18 months, sometimes every year, depending on how hard the owner drives them. It's an extremely high cost. Just the battery alone, at least $300 if you go buy one yourself. And then the labor, again, you're supposed to take off the windshield wiper tray, and you're gonna pay $1,000 at a decent shop to have the battery replaced. We have designed a battery relocation kit where you're retaining your same terminal, so you're still able to jump the car from here if you need to, but it also moves the battery through the factory mounts back to the trunk space. Takes up a little bit of your trunk space, but it looks factory. We're really happy to come out with that product. I'll have that linked in our description once we finalize that, and you can buy it at our store. But that allows the battery to be removed from this engine bay and to last a lot longer. Now, a lot of people in the forums are putting lithium-ion batteries in this place because including that car that's over there, because it starts right up. You don't have the problems of the PTU faults or the DCT faults or the slow startup with the electrical system failure, because the lithium-ion can just crank it right up even if it's been sitting for a while. But I want to warn you, those lithium ions throw a ton of errant faults, and also if it does catch on fire, you're not going to put it out. And anti-gravity says straight on the website, do not put these in high heat environments, and that is exactly what you're doing here. So I would highly suggest you don't use it. I have for sure seen a vehicle come in for a transmission job. We rebuilt the transmission, struggled to get it to pass calibration, and on hot starts, it threw the transmission light. It would drive fine cold if you just continue driving it, but if you stop for gas, start it up, transmission faults, wouldn't shift, turn the car off and back on, it would be fine. We replaced the battery with another AGM and the problem went away. So just be very careful with that. Okay, the last thing we're gonna talk about here is the water pump. I'll go ahead and raise this car up. It's a massive oil and water pump that's located right here. It has 3 pumps that bring oil out of the engine into the dry sump reservoir, and 1 pump that supplies oil to the engine, and then the water pump is just ahead of it. This is a lot of work to replace. You have to remove the subframe, therefore you need to get an alignment after it's done. It's very important that you do this because right here you can see there is a plug. This is what's called a weep hole plug, and directly over it is a weep hole, and it will start to drip coolant out. You'll see it here, you'll see it on this oxygen sensor. When that's dripping, you do have coolant that will begin to go into the oil. If you do oil analysis, you will see potassium and sodium in the oil, which indicates coolant. And when that's happening, there's also moisture that comes in there that will evaporate under heat and then condense at the top of the engine, which is where those timing solenoids are. So if you're seeing that solenoid or that water pump dripping, most likely you are going to have a timing solenoid fault where it will actually rust and seize up inside of the valve covers there. Again, if you're going to replace this water pump, be aware you may have faults with timing, and it's not timing chain, it's not timing variators. Most of the time it's the timing solenoids. You'll see them where they struggle to idle once they get warm, and if you unplug that solenoid, you'll see it settle down and idle fine. That's a good indication that that solenoid is bad, and a lot of times it's because coolant is making its way into the oil. This is again where our battery relocation wire runs, as you can see in a factory bracket here. You know, everything's kept nice and tight and clean. While we have the car up, we'll just go ahead and look at the back of the car. Of course, the transmission is the same 7 DCT that's in, we talked about before. There's tons of videos on my channel. This is a big failure point. The weep hole leak, pressure sensors, the sealed bearings submerged in oil, the speed sensor. When you bring it here to do it, if you bring it here or wherever you go, it's a great time to do the battery relocation because we take down this panel, we drop the gas tank, and we run that cable up over the gas tank. That way it always stays within the frame rails of the car so that an accident doesn't cause a grounding of that cable. The last thing mechanically we're going to talk about on this car is the brake system. As you can see, we've converted this one to steel brakes. Carbon ceramics are what they come with. Obviously extremely expensive to maintain. The rotors in the front have the brake flaw where the pad overlaps the carbon fiber center and eats up the rotor and causes an uneven wear. The rear ones get eaten up a lot of times by the traction control being on. Traction control applies brakes to those rear brake pads, and you'll see a lot of FFs with perfectly good looking front rotors and the rear are just chewed up because, you know, driving with traction control, it will chew up those brake rotors. So you can drive it with, if it's dry conditions and you have good tires, traction control off, the car is four-wheel drive and it very rarely steps out and it just really grips. So I would encourage you, this is one of the few Ferraris where you can safely turn that traction control off. Don't be an idiot, obviously, but it's a very stable car even with that off. One of the big differences between the FF and the GTC is, again, that four-wheel steering, which is controlled back here on the GTC. This is an FF. But what you'll notice is this part number for this axle is the same for the GTC and the FF. And on the GTC, you have this hub changing directions as it's getting power supplied through it. So I see a lot of these axles failing on the GTC for Lusso, making a severe clicking noise as it drives, and it's almost always that axle that needs to be replaced. One more thing about the car I just want to mention as well is these shocks. This is a failure point that they will leak oil out of this area here. You'll see the oil leaking out, or even eventually it will start to leak out of this plug here and give you the suspension fault. And it's just very common for these shocks to fail. We always stock a few sets for the ones with the suspension lift and without, so if you ever need any, just reach out to us, as well as these aluminum collars. We replace those as well a lot. So that's all we have for mechanical issues. As far as other things that you will see that go wrong with these cars, obviously the sticky buttons that affect all Ferraris, you can clean that off. Just be careful when you're cleaning that off. Like some of the forums say, you can just use like an adhesive remover. If you get that gel into, let's say, the AC control panel, it will cause that to fail, and that part is programmed to the car, so it does increase the cost of replacing it. You can just pop it out by hand easily and unplug and replug, but then you've got to get it coated somewhere that can do that for you to the car's VIN. Inside, you also have the leather dash that shrinks up, and that is extremely expensive to repair. You've got to pull a lot of parts out. Make sure with the leather, you just use a conditioner once every 2-3 months, depending on how much you park it outside. Obviously, the car needs to be garaged. If you do park it outside, make sure you're using a conditioner to keep that leather moist, because it's an untreated leather. It gives it a great feel, great smell, but as it dries, it shrinks. Don't use too much conditioner because then you can have an adverse reaction with the adhesive that holds it in. So just put some moisturizer or leather lotion or conditioner on a towel and make it have a nice little sheen to it, just a very light sheen, and that way you keep it moist without breaking it up from the adhesive. It's funny because there's one part of the car that you can't do that to. It has leather around the third brake light in the hatch, which is absolutely mental. Why would you do that? You cannot clean it or condition it. I would highly recommend, if that shrinks up and starts blocking your third taillight, remove it, have a painter sand it and body fill it and paint it some matte black or something like that. It's so stupid why they put that in there. If you tint your windows, you can't even see it anyway. It's very pointless. As far as the other inside items go, sometimes when the control module in the steering wheel goes bad, if you have the tachometer, the lights may stop working. That's due to the control module failure. The seatbelt assist little arm is a plastic gear with plastic arms and a plastic case that eventually just kind of swell and the gear stops extending it, or someone gets it caught on something and it tries to retract and damages the teeth. That's a little bit of annoying, but you can get those parts pretty cheap. The heated seats, because of climbing in and out over the control on the side, those will often come out of alignment and you won't be able to turn them off, or they won't match to the setting that you need. Sometimes you can take those apart and realign them or clean them. Sometimes you just have to replace the whole piece depending on how badly it's been damaged. And aside from that, that's a lot of stuff, but that is all the things that we see fail all the time. And again, I know I can already hear he's just some YouTube mechanic, he's not a Ferrari specialist. These problems are so consistent that, you know, we tell people, they go, nah, sure, whatever, and then we see the car come back a couple months later, exactly what you said, Micah, we need to get that done. So just factor that into your purchasing. You can still buy this V12 far cheaper than any other Italian V12, 100,000 less than the GTC4 Lusso, and the GTC4 will have the same exact problems. The F12, the 812, aside from the PTU, they had the same exact problems, the same valve cover, the same battery problem, the same everything else. So don't think like, oh, it's a crap Ferrari. It's a high maintenance vehicle. You do these items to it and you'll get a good 10 years before they need to be done again. And at some point we'll start to see values, start to, hey, has this all been done? Let me see the receipts, and the value will be higher. I'm not saying enough to match what you pay for them, but if you want this amazing sounding V12, that's the cost of ownership. Damn, that thing sounds so good. Holy shit. Damn, that thing sounds so good. All right, so just to wrap things up, the FF, I didn't like it when it first came out. It's really grown on me. It's a beautiful car. It's very fast through corners with that four-wheel drive system with loss of traction. If you want to put your child in a car, it's got a back seat for you. It has a lot of really cool features. The sound is incredible. You don't need very much adjustment to the factory exhaust to make a beautiful exhaust note. So I don't want to say all these things and be like, oh, this is a terrible car. It's a Ferrari. Any high-end Ferrari is being built kind of at the edge of what's physically able at the time of its production. So it does have small tolerances that have to be maintained, and it causes the maintenance to be very high. But again, the cost of maintenance for this versus any other V12 Ferrari is no different. That's going to be in that 10-year range, and you can still get it for $100,000 less than the next cheapest V12. That means you can buy it. If you bought a $90,000 one of these and put $100,000 worth of maintenance, you're still $30,000 under a GTC Lusso, which is just a few years behind this and will need all of that work done as well. So I'm a huge fan. Hopefully this has helped you a lot with what to expect. And we stock all parts for this thing, all these parts that we've discussed. So if you ever need anything and can't get it from Ferrari, we offer those, and we do offer an expedited shipping on those as well.